looks at me and she's just like, I've never been in the woods before. It is so beautiful.
Yeah.
Like,
It's funny. Like,
I was like, that's why I'm doing this.
You are listening to Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Urban Wildlife Podcast. It's been a little while. I got Billy Brown here. I'm one of your co-hosts with
Tony Crosdale.
And as always, we are part of the Wildlife Observer Network. Please check out all of our wonderful podcasts. And it has been so long that I think we forgot the usual introductory stuff that we do. If you want to, I got it. If you want to reach out to us, you can tweet at us at UrbWildlifeCast. You can email us at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. Let us know any ideas you might have for podcast episodes. But yeah, we've been on a odd hiatus, especially given that we were working together over the summer.
Yeah.
We had a funny situation, I guess, where given how long we've known each other, where I have been in sort of a career transition mode and was looking at the summer and noticed that there was a listing for seasonal environmental educators, basically at the environmental centers in Philadelphia. And I texted Tony, was like, wait, can this happen at Cobbs Creek? And Tony just texted back, best summer ever with an exclamation point. And it turns out he was right. It was the best summer ever. It was a blast. So actually, Tony, you run this place. Maybe tell people like what happens at the environmental center like this here in the Cobbs Creek corridor at the western edge of Philadelphia.
Yeah. So, to avoid any questions about like nepotism and whatnot. Honestly, we had an extra position this year than normal. And unfortunately a lot of, times people end up flaking on you, which actually the third person ended up doing just that. Because this is a seasonal job and, people, get other opportunities, but because of the difficulties inherent in onboarding with a big governmental bureaucracy, if you lose somebody, you basically, by the time you start the process over getting the next person on board, you've missed almost the whole summer.
Right.
So having someone who is extremely reliable is that is who can do the job and is extremely reliable. It's like kind of like a no-brainer to bring them on because that you're going to be able to have someone who will be dependable, won't leave and will actually show up for work on time and things like that and knows the material. I mean, it's that's a huge thing for seasonal help. So the joke was, we had the most overqualified seasonal educator, but I'm sure a lot of people have actually done this in retirement too, the other way where they, so what we do for the summer, we host, we host our own summer camp for 1 or 2 weeks, and then we host summer camps visiting us from other facilities, mostly recreation facilities in our own department, but other. And
just so people who might not be from a city like this might not know, so a recreation facility, like a rec center, is like a building usually with a playground or a park next to it in neighborhoods in Philadelphia. Where for the summer kids will go and they'll have a camp where they play basketball, they do various other kinds of camp-like activities, but in a very urban setting. And so, we have the largest rec center system in the United States. We're the fifth, well, I guess technically now sixth biggest city. But a lot of Phoenix sucks.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the other at least two of the other cities that are bigger than us theoretically are more like sprawl than. But if you want they can kind of count their suburbs, a significant part of the suburbs as a city because the city limits wasn't drawn in the 1800s.
They grew by annexation more than Philadelphia did.
Yeah. So, but in terms of like big dense skyscrapery cities, like Philadelphia, even cities bigger than us, like Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York City have smaller amounts of rec centers and pools for that matter, and ours are free.
Yeah.
So you may have to like pay a fee to like be on the like basketball league or something, you know.
Yeah.
But generally, you can just go and like use the facilities for free, use the pool for free. So and they have summer camps, which are not free, but they're a much smaller cost than any other equivalent. I mean, it's more or less childcare for the summer, you know.
Right.
And they go on field trips to various locations, and we host them for about 6 weeks, as well as, you know, other groups that might want to come. And then we still have our like, you know, evening and weekend like one-off programs, and we generally just host visitors. We also, you know, people can just walk in, look at the fish tank, you know, turtles, and our exhibits, which Billy had a big hand in and upgrading and changing this year, and you know, we have a library, things like that. You can come in, you know, use binoculars, look at the feeders, you know, look at our grounds that are, you know, have like a lot of specimen plants and whatnot, a food forest and a native plant pollinator garden. So there's a lot of amenities people just walk in to as well. So kind of like three things, right? Is three main kind of is captive audiences that are literally bust to us, like programs for like. That people come on their own, you know, like families or you know, we do adult programming as well, and they're usually one off, not like you know, recurring events. Is, you know, bat night here, bird walk here, campfire, things like that, and then we have drop-in visitors. Another component, I guess, the fourth thing is other entities using the building, such as the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts, the nonprofit that we have a relationship with. So there was a Boy Scout camp for 1 or 2 weeks this summer, as well as a workforce development program that had about 20 some students in the building all summer.
True. Yeah.
Then another entity was overseeing, and that's so that's, you know, that's generally what we do.
It is, and it was. I'm in my head trying to remember to keep this on the wildlife track. But I think as a step back with nature and more generally, I admit that I had thought more, just because it's what I had experienced. I sort of saw our environmental centers as places where you drop in or where you come to some particular one-off kind of program, where you come in and you go to the moth night that they're holding, or like the like you're saying, the bat walk, or maple sugar festival or something like that. And I hadn't appreciated something that now for me has come to the fore a lot, which is like the resource for all those rec center camps. Because for all the other things, like you're relying on people who are already are sort of self-selecting to be interested in nature. Right. And like, so, you know, my family is going to go to every environmental center we pass, of course. Right. Every nature center we pass. But like what happens with the rec centers is you just get kids from the neighborhoods who, you know, who so many of them have never been in the woods before.
I mean, I've literally, no exaggeration, had a girl on a walk once that asked me, "Is this the woods?" I've never been in the woods before. I
had a girl, and this is where I almost cried. I was like, there's like, you know, a bunch of 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 8-year-olds or so, and one of them looks at me and she's just like, "I've never been in the woods before. It is so beautiful."
Yeah,
like,
it's funny. Like I was
like, that's why I'm doing this.
Yeah, I almost wish I would like take down these quotes, because, like, you know, when you do this job like every few months, you know, and especially in the summer when you have the rec center kids, you get a fair amount of those comments.
Yeah.
That just blow your mind, and you're like, oh, this is really important, you know? And this is also one of the reasons, like, I personally I really am very against going to places. Like, now I understand that, like, a lot of environmental centers, there's a revenue issue, and they use offsite visits to generate. I mean, they get 100 a pop at least, probably every time they go to a school or something, or every class probably in that.
Where they take like a program in a box to a school,
right?
And then
break
out the animal pelts and talk a little bit about the park.
Yeah. So with us and with having such a small staff, like generally the non-municipal environmental centers that surround us that are generally private or whatnot, they have generally much larger staffs and they do a lot more outreach than us. So, but it kind of sets this idea of like, oh, that's what environmental centers do. But you're like, well, there's only 2 full-time educators. So if we're not here, no one's here. So I make it a big point to, because what I don't want to happen is eventually that like, I don't know how much I have to wear, but slippery slope. But I'm worried that like, if we start doing that more, it'll be an expectation. And it's an easy way to get numbers, and then the next thing you know, like your schedule is like full of these off sites, and you don't get, and it's easy. A teacher, it's great. Like they don't have to do any work. You just show up and like teach your class for them, right? And there's no slips, there's no bus rental, there's nothing, But to me, I'm like, I'm not a classroom teacher. I have no interest in being a classroom teacher. My skills don't really, So I'm a biologist. I can talk to people. So we do our best work in the field. So that's why, and it just shows how valuable it is, because you don't get that experience of kids being like, I'm in the woods, or like seeing a deer, or,
Yeah. And I think it's, it's something we talked about a lot over the summer is sort of centering the role of this environmental center as like a hub or gateway for the broader park.
Yeah.
And that the really the classroom is out there, and what we want people to learn is out there. And so like we might start a program inside, but then you want to get outside and get kids, rolling logs to find the bugs under there. And you can talk about forest ecology quite a bit then. You can talk about what invertebrates do, what various invertebrates do. You can talk about fungi and how they break down dead wood and things. Like you can do all that, but it's just so much better to do it where they're having a visceral connection to all of it. And I'd say even it's, if you have like 20, kids walking through the woods, you're not going to see many live animals because they're all getting the heck out of there, unless you're finding small stuff under cover, or maybe birds that are flying past or high enough up not to care, I guess. But but we had a program on like just animal tracks that was a huge hit.
Yeah.
And you get kids out there like checking all the edges of mud puddles for different kind of prints, and then we can sort of really have a discussion of like the different animal trails that we have around us in the woods. And
all our programs are wildlife focused. Like that's the thing is like we're not like recycle, like sustainability. Like,
I was gonna say we had the geology program. Don't forget that.
Yeah, but like it's not wildlife per se, but like the underlying geology determines the plant community, which then determines animal community. Sure. So like to me, that's something to not be ignored and an important part of ecology. The abiotic part of it. But when it comes to like the visiting groups, there's always so our park is not. It's funny you say it's not particularly large. I mean, it's 800 acres. It's large, but compared to other parks in Philly, because Philly has this immense park system that you've heard us talk about many times. Our biggest point of pride, I would say, as a Philadelphian, is this. That the diversity of the city, I would say number one. But then the fact that
we have lots of points of pride, but one of them is the park system.
Yeah, is this, which a lot of people don't realize that a city like Philadelphia has, and right through the city. Like it's not like like a lot of cities where they have like an area that's on the outskirts that's large, like Rocky Mountain Arsenal in Denver, or like Forest Park in Portland or something. You know what I mean? Like I think the Trinity River thing in Dallas, or it's not necessarily like right in the heart of the city where like dense urban housing goes right up to it. Right. And you can literally just walk from a row house from about as dense as urban, other than like apartment blocks. And even in Philadelphia, there are actually plenty of places with apartment blocks across from, a park. Like
right at Walnut Street.
Yeah. So anyway, we our programs are wildlife focused. So this park is saying it's not that, especially the part of the park we're in is kind of narrow, and it's not a big trail system. So at the other two environmental centers, the programs tend to be kind of like guided walks, and they end up to take the kids on a mile or two walk generally through a different habitat or down to the stream or something. The part of park is quite narrow where we are, and we don't have a trail system, and you can actually in the part of park you actually usually see the houses from the one trail, so it's not like as immersive an experience as we would like them. We could take them if we had more time. We could take them to the park, but the point is rather than taking them on a long walk, we do these like activity rotations.
Yeah,
which tend to be all outside. Sometimes when we don't have another group inside and we don't have the COVID restrictions, we will do an indoor component that, if anything, is to give kids, Philadelphia, we're viewed as a northeast city, but I think technically it was a Hoppen scale where we're like the northernmost part of the humid subtropics, like technically, and you definitely know that.
Yeah, you know that in August.
Not now when we're sitting in a room with a space heater when it's 25 degrees outside, but like in July and August, it's generally in the 90s and extremely humid. So anyway,
the kids need a break.
yeah. So
especially because one of the rotations is out in this meadow. Where you give the kids a bunch of nets to sweep with, and then you go through what bugs they catch and talk about that, which is a fabulous element. I mean, to have kids out there catching stuff. And then,
So it's only 4 rotations. There's 3 rotations, but we might change them out. There's 4 we do. Generally, it's 3, just because that's the staff available, and it's usually like 20 or so minutes, 20 minutes, a half hour each rotation, depending on the time. We basically take the time they're here, divided by 3, and with a couple minutes for change. But one is decomposers, where you flip logs and you look at things. Underneath, another one is sweep nets in a meadow, looking for insects. And then the other one is generally either a bird walk with binoculars or an animal show and tell inside, where it's in the room where we have the bulk of the turtles.
Yep.
And then we also have like pelts and skulls and other animal artifacts. And that's good too, because you can get real informational. You could really like talk about the animals in depth. You could, you talk about, I think, you're not restricted to what, you could always talk about things when you're out, but you're not really restricted to what you're encountering. You can just kind of like riff. You can just show a photo. You can just talk in general and answer a lot of their questions, because they're not actively like trying to like catch something or look up something. Right. So it's a good, it's just kind of like the introduction, even if it's not necessarily, because the rotation, it might not be the first. It's not guaranteed to be their first lesson. Right. So, and generally, like, I personally don't like to greet a group of 30 to 60 students and give them all an intro, because I feel like there's too many of them. So I, some people like to, and I let them if they want to. But
especially when you have little kids,
I give them them a quick rundown and then split them up into the 3 groups, and then whoever gets the first group, the first session, everyone's first session is a little bit of an intro. But I tend, regardless, the indoor session, and even the bird walk can start indoors. We give a quick look at the animals and show. We have a mural, a very well done, realistic mural that we'll have like shopping carts and like sewers and things like in the mural. It's really accurate of the park.
It is.
So we get to show. Yeah. So anyway, I'm talking too much. This is what I do every day for my life, and Billy gets to do it for a summer. So.
Yeah, it was a beautiful summer, and it's one of the things I did. And talking about the wildlife elements more, I had a lot of fun taking some of those, like a lot of environmental centers. You have your deer antlers, you got some skulls, you got animal pelts from various of your local wildlife. So we got a fox, a coyote, skunk, raccoon. Possum. I think there's a woodchuck in there. No, it was a muskrat and a squirrel.
The thing is, I might have been lying to kids forever, because there's been a skull in there that I always assumed was a beaver, and then I saw a tag the other day that said porcupine.
Oh, really?
But I don't know if that skull or just a random tag.
The point is, you get out there. What I would do is I go to so to continue painting a picture of the park. So, like you were saying, it's a narrow creek corridor park. On one side of it to the west is are areas of our neighboring county called Delaware County. And on the east is Philadelphia. And both sides, the neighborhoods are relatively dense row houses, what some people might call townhouses, kind of packed in along, like right up to the road across from the park.
Yeah, so the Upper Darby is not like you cross over and suddenly it's like cul-de-sacs and like and like like curved driveways or whatever. If you didn't understand that there was like the street signs are different color, like into Philadelphia, and you know that. If you didn't know that, you wouldn't know you left the city. And
Right.
Upper Darby is not. It's a city. It's a small city. It's actually one of the.
It's one of the larger cities in
I think
Pennsylvania.
it's fifth biggest.
But we
And
don't think about it because we think of it as a suburb.
It's kind of like
Yeah.
Compton, or Gary, Indiana. There's like these cities that are like next to Gary next to Chicago,
Sure.
Compton's next to Los Angeles. There's these cities that like are known internationally, probably because of Michael Jackson and all the, hood movies and NWA and stuff from the 90s, with Compton. Like there's these like cities that aren't actually like the same municipality as the larger, more famous city. But for some reason, like because a prominent actor or like for whatever they became prominent, culturally important, we know about these like smaller
I don't know, man. With Tina Fey, people might know Upper Darby.
That's what I was getting to. Tina Fey is from Upper Darby. So,
Yeah.
And then there's been like the mayor of Easttown, although technically that's a little bit. I think she's technically from. I think that
They make it vague exactly
she's
where it is.
from Delaware County, but works in Chester County. And Delaware County is interesting. There's a Delaware County because of like Silver Linings Playbook. Bradley Cooper's from. Actually, I think Bradley Cooper's from Monco, but
I think he is.
but
the
Silver
Lanark
Lin-
Diner figured prominently in that.
the Silver Linings Playbook for some reason like maybe like like John Hughes movies were like not in Chicago, they're next to Chicago, that like whatever suburb it was or whatever. And so I feel like for some reason like I mean it is a county of a several million people or something, or not, or maybe like maybe like a million people. I mean that's quite as big as Philly, but Delaware County is the second most populous county in Pennsylvania. It's as big, it's as densely populated. So I guess it's somehow it's gotten. I feel like there's a show Delco Proper. Somehow Delaware County has gotten national recognition.
Well, so you might have heard of Delaware County, but yeah. So the bottom line is, we got urbanized right up to the edges.
Yeah.
On both sides, and then along the Philly side, where in our stretch of the park, there's a multi-use path that's pretty popular, and so it's that part of the park is kind of like landscaped with trees along the parkway, a road that's kind of that 4-lane road, and then I would take sort of the grab bag mammal specimens up to the parkway with some of our program calendars and things like that, and I would just like put up a folding table and lay out animal pelts on it. And so it was a fun conversation starter with people who are out there on the multi-use path, using it partly as a hook to get people to come to our programs, but partly just as like a way to show people what lives in the park and interact with and sort of try to expand people's experience of it. If it's what someone knows is that, oh, this is the place where I come out and I walk my dog, or I go on a run every morning before I go to work. I think that a lot of folks just haven't thought to go down the hill into the woods. And so having, confronting them with a dead fox is one good way to start a conversation. But then you hear lots of fun stories. I mean, this is where, it's one of these things where you try to teach people something, but then you also talk to them and see what you can learn from them. And so I would be out there, with the various pelts, and people come by and tell me about the raccoons in their alleys or the possums that they see, about the white-tailed deer that sometimes make it out of the park and nibble on their gardens. And sorry, Tony was pausing for a selfie right there.
Documenting
the magic. And so it was just a lot of fun to sort of see how, even if we're talking about the park, the gateway to the park, the wildlife of the park is not like hermetically sealed in the park. We've got plenty of stuff that wanders out and that people interact with. We've got peregrine falcons that They didn't successfully nest, but they gave it a good try this year at a church right across the street. And so we could talk about red-tailed hawks. We could talk about peregrine falcons, talk about, I don't know, all sorts of stuff. We were out doing cleanup on the edge of the park over there, and we heard a raven calling. There's a lot that we can use, sort of like the classroom that is the woods and the park, to help teach people about like what are things that live outside of the park in spaces that we think of as more urban. So we had a good time with that. I don't know. We're still. I think we're kind of rambling, but this is just sort of our reflections on. We have taken on the podcast as almost like a nature education, wildlife education mission for the two of us, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, this is what Tony does for a living, but for me, it was like a fun time to try out other ways of accomplishing the same kind of mission.
Well, first of all, yeah, like Billy, we had a stream table that's no longer functioning. So
what's the stream table?
the stream table is a basin like that can hold water that's usually like oblong, right? Yeah. So, and you run water through it, and there's usually a way to either the basin itself has a pitch to it, or you can adjust the pitch and move the whole thing. And water comes from one end through generally sand or other media to replicate a moving stream.
Yep.
The one we have was very large. I mean, it's about 12 feet long, 15 feet long, or something like that.
You were involved with getting it installed.
Yeah, and it's unfortunately, there's no plumbing in the room, so I had to recycle. I have a pump that recycles water through, in a basin that the water drains to. And the problem is that the pump would get full of sand. So it was a good idea, but it didn't work out. So,
and the object of it is to teach people about watersheds and how how water running off different kinds of surfaces.
Yeah, and honestly, I wanted that to be in a different room, but this predates Parks and Rec. This is with a nonprofit. When I worked for the nonprofit here, and they wanted it there because they wanted everything to be like a hands-on school rather than like exhibits that you observe. So, and it's not really appropriate for an exhibit room anyway because it requires a staff person to run the thing and like keep an eye on it.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it was full of sand and not water for years. And the problem is that sand is everywhere. Like we used to have binoculars like in the rooms so people can look at the feeders, but then the kids just dump the binoculars into the sand when you're not looking, and then your binoculars are taken out of commission and sand gets everywhere. So we took the sand out, which was a big process because it's hundreds of pounds of sand. Well, anyway, then Billy had this great idea to turn it into a touch table, and then went and did it, and he also laminated plant specimens. So, I mean, why don't you talk about what you did? It was very popular.
I think that a touch table, for those who haven't been in it, is like a standard kind of thing you see in a nature center, where you have we'll call them specimens. You have stuff from the park around you, or the wild spaces around you that people can get their hands on. So you don't encourage people to pick up turtles. But if you've got a dead turtle shell, you can have that in the touch table, and you don't and people usually can't, hold birds, but you could have like feathers and stuff like that. You can have rocks that sort of reflect the local geology. And this is the kind of stuff we did. I got, we have beavers that live upstream from us in a different section of the park, but really not too far away. And I grabbed some and sawed off some half-chewed beaver logs to bring in so people could see what beaver sign looks like. We had some deer antlers in there, stuff that people can get their hands on, and then ideally get them then set off into the park with something in their search images and a way to sort of help them make the stuff that they might only kind of observe out there a little more concrete. You might just see a flicker, flying around from tree to tree, or hear it calling, but we can show you the feathers. And so we did that kind of thing with a touch table. It was a lot of fun, and it was fun to then see kids getting into it and picking things up and asking what it was. We have in the building we had a whole bunch of these of microscopes, and so we grabbed a couple. One or two down there. We have at least one dissecting microscope, and I grabbed a bunch, like a feather, a bunch of like various dead bugs that people can now get under the dissecting scope, which is a lot of fun. I mean, we one of the things that I was just picking stuff off the windowsills, and these like tiny flies turned out to be these like, I guess in my mind, extra tiny wasps. And so you can really drill down on them and, you know, look at a housefly's eyeball, you know, and see like how it's weirdly hairy.
Talk to an insect person about this, entomologist. I'm curious as to why flies seem to top out at a size like Diptera, kind of reach a maximum size much smaller than the maximum size of Hymenoptera. You just said it. You think of these extra small wasps, right? It's because we think of wasps. You know, yellow jacket tends to be
We're biased to the stuff we have an easy time observing.
Right, but a yellow jacket, which is like the default, you know, wasp in our area, or honeybee, right, which is a wasp,
right?
Technically, they're about the same size, I would say, generally. And they're about as, if you had a fly landed on you as big as a honeybee, you know, you'd be like surprised and like worried about how big a bite's going to take out of you. Right?
Well, but there are flies as big as honeybees, and they're, you know, the various they're parasitic flies. The ones that what are the ones called that they lay their larvae develop like in botflies?
But I think botflies are tend to be smaller.
No, but there's some that the squirrel ones that parasitize squirrels. Like they are, some of them are bee mimics, and they're in similar size.
But like, you know, we think of like you know, honeybees and wasps. You know, most. I mean, I've seen in the Arctic these big you know, biting flies that are like, we call them caribou flies.
Yeah.
And they're like, you know, maybe 2 inches long. They're pretty big. I mean, like, and they're so slow. I don't know where it is. I have a picture of a polar bear with like 5 of them on its face that I took. Anyway, like, in fact, think about it. Like, this is, I took a picture of a polar bear with like you know, it's like I forget, you know, like a little digital camera. And you could see these wasps on his face. Because imagine how close I would felt comfortable getting to a polar bear, right? And
you can still see the flies
without a telephoto lens, right?
Yeah.
So like that just shows you how big the flies are. Because I was not that close to the polar bear. I was in a vehicle. It was at the Churchill dump. But anyway, like there's nothing. I don't think any flies get anywhere near as big as like, you know, the cicada killers and stuff like that. You know.
What about crane flies? You counting them? They're not that massive. They're just really long.
They're really long. Yeah, they're good. They are Diptera, but they're much lighter, I would think.
There were these tiger bee flies we were seeing. That, what's the genus? Starts with an X. It's like Xenox or Xenops or something like that. And it is a dramatic looking fly. It's like dark with these like interestingly like patterned wings, and it parasitizes carpenter bee nests. So the larvae develop. So a carpenter bee will dig a hole. Female carpenter bees are the ones who do all the work and are the ones, you know, raising the young. They dig a hole back into like a log or a beam on your house if you're unlucky. But they dig into wood and then they build little cells that they then lay an egg in, and they put in like a pellet, you know, of packed together nectar and pollen, which is the way really most bees operate. They seal it up and they do another cell, right? And lay another egg. And so the tiger bee flies get in there and they lay their eggs in one of the cells, and then their larvae develops and like eats the. I don't know if they just eat the carpenter bee larvae or eat the pollen honey or pollen nectar pellet. Probably eat all of it. And so they're like size comparable to like a carpenter bee. And it was one of these things where they're totally harmless to people, but you get a big reaction out of a bunch of kids when a few of those fly in.
Yeah.
All of it's just to say, I don't know. I was thinking, coleoptera, like the beetles get even bigger.
Yeah, beetles get huge.
Beetles get huge. Dragonflies get huge. But in any case, that's the kind of stuff we did here. And it was, in some ways, it was kind of like Urban Wildlife Podcast Live, in the sense that, like, you know, I did some moth nights and some bat walks where I could sort of talk about bats in the city, or sort of nocturnal insect diversity in the city. One thing that I like, I keep holding moth nights in Philadelphia, and they really should be called caddisfly nights, because what we have show up, and this is true in my community garden, which is about a mile from any body of water, where you put up a sheet, you light it up. Maybe just we don't have as many moths in the city, in urban areas, but like you get a few moths and you get a ton of these aquatic flies. Stone flies, caddis flies, scorpion flies. I don't know what.
They're not dipter; they're in their own.
They're their own groups, right? They're the kind of stuff that like lives like
orders. Yes.
yeah, orders. Thank you. That have these very ephemeral adult lives. You know, they develop in the water for like months or years, and then like they pop out for a few weeks or a few hours to breed.
Yeah, it's one thing
And then-
people don't think about is, a lot of animals. The adult stage is a very short, insignificant portion of that creature's life.
Yeah,
And it's literally off. It's just
I mean, we had the cicada emergence to like drive that home.
yeah,
17-year cicadas.
yeah. And it's just to like it's basically they only have. It makes sense for like things like if you're living in a stream, like how do you get your DNA to another stream, right? If you are a caterpillar, is a good example. They, they live much longer as a. Think about it like most Lepidoptera are annual creatures. They don't live more than a year.
And that means like moths and butterflies.
Yeah. So
Some of them don't even eat. I mean, like you think of the
Yeah.
Cecropia moths, which are these like, or
Yeah.
silk moths in general, these big dramatic looking moths. They don't eat.
some of the adult stages of insects don't have mouth parts, right?
Yeah.
They can't eat at all. Like so, these animals, they're just caterpillar is they generally don't. The eggs are laid on a plant. They don't leave that plant, that individual plant, and then how they can't because they can't really consume the tissue of other species or other families of plants or species of plant. So then they would have to like crawl down the tree, risk being on the ground, and hopefully climb up the stem of another.
To disperse.
Yeah, or and especially if you're in the canopy, how you're going to come all the way down, and hopefully you're going to climb up the right species of tree.
You need a flying life phase. Yeah.
So they have these flying life phases, and they're just very short. So
In any case, we wanted to give sort of a quick picture of what the heck we've been doing all summer. Now that it's almost winter, and I think I'll start getting a few more episodes together. We've got an interesting inquiry from some folks in a city that are kind of fighting a political battle with I'll say, advocates for outdoor cat colony or outdoor cat feeding that are from out of town. It's kind of an interesting look at the politics of this kind of thing. I've got one cooking in the theme of like, should Billy be hunting or go hunting? For an article I'm writing, had a great interview with a new Philly hunter, and it's a good way to start talking about also race and equity of access to hunting as an example of access to the outdoors and sort of nature experience in general.
I got a guy I want to talk to. He said he'd do it. I got to follow up. I got to like set the date and stuff. Who works for Disney in Orlando, and so wants to talk about like the urban wildlife of Disney World.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I visited there. Like it's funny. I went to I visited my girlfriend and I at the time. It was like 15, 17 years ago. Visited. She's from Florida, but I met her. She's from Daytona. We met in Orlando, and our plan was to go to like Joe Overstreet Landing, where there's snail kites and whooping cranes and caracaras and a bunch of cool stuff. And like, but we're staying, in Orlando, or Kissimmee. Same difference. It's like all this, And I remember we got back from this very successful trip to see snail kites and stuff, and there was just this snail kite flying around like the lake in town. And so it was just like, so it's pretty, Orlando is like, just like, Florida is like, if you zoom in on almost any part of Florida, from maybe like Gainesville south, it kind of looks like Swiss cheese. There's like, there's so much water in Florida. And as we know, we are like the urban wildlife people, right? And like water is always the interesting thing where like it kind of like, water always brings more wildlife, because the wildlife that's attracted to water is kind of tends to ignore. You always, how do I articulate? We have a lot of wildlife that have been coming back, have come into the cities, and it seems like more and more like the boars and like a lot of wildlife tends, has been
Red-tailed hawks.
yeah, things like that. Like, 50 years, like even like 20 years ago, there wasn't as much wildlife in cities, and more you go. So I guess it took them a little while, like cities as we know them now, post-industrial revolution, cities. I feel like wildlife took some time. Well, terrestrial wildlife took some time to like feel comfortable and also I think people just used to eat them more and kill them. But like, but the thing is whenever there's a body of water, it's like the humpback whales in like New York City. It's like you're literally like in city limits in New York and it's a humpback whale, right? But it's the ocean, right? But it's like or harbor, and like harbor seals and sea lions and like bald eagles and ospreys have been in cities, in good because they eat fish and just need a tree. So there's a lot of wildlife that like, you can always reliably encounter wildlife.
Yeah.
Like alligators have always been in cities because they're in like canals and water bodies, right? So like, that's the thing about Florida is like, it's inherently great for urban wildlife because there's so much water. Because you have to drain it. There's always like retention ponds and canals and things.
Yeah.
Or there's the body of water that they weren't able to drain that you happen to be either the ocean itself or mangrove swamp or like a slough or just some ponds or springs, So Florida is just like, if I was to pick basically one area in the country to like live to enjoy urban wildlife, it would probably be Florida.
Urban wildlife.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Otherwise, I wouldn't want to live in Florida.
Yeah.
No offense, Florida.
I love Cuban food.
Okay, well, there you
I like snorkeling. So
I like snorkeling.
Florida's great.
No, I'm not going to give you that. Sorry. I'm kind of anti-Florida. But we'll put that aside.
Yeah.
I'll agree that like you got some great aquatic related urban wildlife in Florida.
Yeah.
But hey, we got more of that coming up. So please don't be a stranger. Keep tuning in when we send you episodes.
And keep sending us ideas.
And please keep sending us
Yeah,
ideas.
if you send us an idea, very likely we'll actually like be like, what time can you talk? And we'll record your voice.
Exactly. All right. Take care, guys. Thanks.
Cheers.